you start to enter into the periphery, call it, of the hierarchy. And the periphery of the hierarchy means that you're being tested. You can't be brought in totally at that point because the hierarchy within each ashram is like a fortress. There's what they call the law of the fortress. And because the initiate to be is still in the state of struggle and trying to overcome the forces of their past karma, many negative forces can be there that can impact on the ashram. And they prevent that by creating sort of a space on the periphery of the ashram. Until you pass close to the third initiation, then you've purified your being, overcome a great deal of this negative karma in an occult sense, and then you can pass into the third initiation.
Welcome back, everybody, to Joshua's Magic. Got another interview today with an interesting guest. This time, I have Cyrus Ryan. He's the director of the Northern School of Esoteric Wisdom and the author of Living on the Inner Edge, an Occult Practical Tale, and the soon-to-be released book, Esoteric Writings, Teachings for the Aquarian Age. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Cyrus. Good to
Oh,
have
my pleasure, Joshua. It's nice to be invited, and I'm sure we'll have a great conversation. Well, this is my book for those that are watching, Living on the Inner Edge, Practical Occult Tale, and it's available, at least I know, on Amazon, and it's been out for quite a few years. But if you're interested in the deeper aspects of the esoteric tradition, including the Yoga Sutras, even the Fourth Way, Vajrayana Buddhism, and Theosophy, it's all synthesized in this particular tale. And it's got excellent reviews from quite a few, how we call reviewers, and please buy it.
Well, we'll have a link to where people can check that out in the description.
Sure.
But Cyrus has been teaching for a number of years and has a depth of knowledge on Theosophy, Alice Bailey works, and Buddhism, like he said. So I wanted to have him on to talk about initiation. And the topic of initiation goes pretty deep, but to start at a more surface level, what is initiation? Is that where you have some sort of ceremony and then you're given secret knowledge, or how do we talk about initiation in these deeper teachings?
Well, there's two ways. One, there's exoteric initiations, and then there's esoteric initiations. They're vastly different. If you belong to an organization, they may give you an initiation. It's somewhat like if you were doing a martial art and you go from a yellow belt to a green belt. You perform a particular task, which is almost like a ceremony. And if you've done it well, then you get a new belt. So there are many organizations, the Masonic or Rosicrucian, and they undergo exoteric or open within their organization ceremonies when you've reached a certain level, and they call that initiation. Esoteric initiation is not easy really to describe because it varies for individuals, but there are general guidelines. But what it has to do is the transference of consciousness from one body to another body, the removal of limitations. And as each limitation is removed, then you can undergo an initiation and then an expanse of living experience and conscious experience. So there are many books that give different descriptions about initiations, but it's the removing of limitations that keep your consciousness bound up. And once you've gone certain processes, and then you remove these limitations, and then you feel a change, and then you've undergone an initiation. Some of the early initiations, and there are what they call full initiations and semi or partial initiations. Sometimes you recognize it, and sometimes you may not.
You mentioned different bodies. For people that don't know what you're referring to, could you elaborate on that?
You mean like the Rosicrucian and the Masonic? Was
Well,
that
you're
what
saying
you?
the transference of
Oh, I see.
different
Okay,
bodies.
so in the different systems, for instance, the Sankhya yoga system, philosophy, which is one of the oldest, I don't think they even know when it began, mentions that we have five bodies. So the best way to study it is to have some little, you don't need a lot, understanding of Sanskrit. So our first body is called the Anna Maya Kosha. Anna means food. So the body that lives from food. This body, we eat. I haven't had lunch yet, so I need my food. So the Anna Maya Kosha is our first body. But we have vitality and strength. That comes from your Prana Maya Kosha, the body of prana. The occult, they call it the etheric body. If you have a little bit of psychic vision, sometimes you can see not a halo, but a little energy field that has no color. So not the aura, maybe an inch away from the body. That's your pranamaya kosha. Then there's the manamaya, pardon me, yeah, manamaya kosha, which includes your astral and mental lower mind, more our personality. And that's the third body. The fourth body is called the Vijnana Maya Kosha, or it's the body of independent consciousness or individual consciousness. We use the term soul. So our soul is actually a individualized unit of consciousness. It's also called the Jiva Atma. But in the Sankhya system, it's the Vijnana Maya Kosha. Just to explain a little bit, the word Maya means illusion, and Kosha means sort of like sheath. So you have a sheath that you put a knife in. So the consciousness is within this sheath. So our individualized consciousness, as in the other four bodies. The fifth body is the Ananda Maya Kosha. Uh, Translated, Ananda means blissful. So the blissful body, the Anandamaya kosha, why it's called blissful is that when you can transfer your consciousness to that particular body from the Vijnanamaya kosha, you break away all or are released from all the karma, all the pains and struggles and difficulties of human life. You become enlightened, therefore blissful. So those are the five bodies. So with each of those five bodies, there's initiations. And different schools use different terminology. The how would you call it? Taraka Yoga uses for the Anandamaya Kosha, they call it the Karana Sharira, but when you're enlightened, it becomes a Karana Upadi. Upadi means vehicle. Just like a car is a vehicle, you can get in it and move. When you attain enlightenment, your individualized consciousness can use the body as a vehicle. So if you've read about the masters of wisdom, they're ashrams and they live within their Karana Upadis. They're uh, blissful vehicles, if you wish. So those are the five bodies.
What would that vehicle be translated into theosophical or Alice Bailey terms?
Buddhic vehicle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's kind of an overview. So those organizations like the Rosicrucians and the Masons have these external ceremonies, and then they give them some knowledge or a bit more information. But the esoteric initiations is where you're making the steps. You're penetrating deeper into reality or within yourself, as the case may be.
Correct.
Yeah. So what are some pitfalls and dangers people should be cautious of when they're actually at the point of walking this path towards initiation?
Well, there are numerous. The Buddhists talk about the five poisons, and there are so many. The main, uh, I guess, pitfall for everyone is being able to disassociate from one's feeling of accomplishment. With the idea of accomplishment comes the pitfalls of pride, arrogance. There's what they call more in a deeper sense the development of an occult personality, thinking that you're somebody special, you're better than others. Thus, you end up becoming hard and cold versus humble and compassionate. And that is seen so often in the occult. In the voice of the silence, they call one of this aspect self-aggrandizement, where you place yourself on a tower where nobody sees you but yourself because your self-interest becomes so great. And that is a very, very difficult, even very advanced, so-called advanced esoteric students run into that kind of difficulty. It is the most common. And there are certain, let's call it teachings that actually reinforce this. Thus, when the Buddha came, he didn't make any focus on the different bodies like the ones that I mentioned, but more on levels of consciousness. And he made his teaching more abstract to help to counter this aspect of building the occult or spiritual personality, whichever you want to call it. That's why when you see there's many gurus, and I know I haven't followed any or read about them in a long time, but in the 70s and 80s, when I was wandering, not wandering, but traveling through the US and meeting different, and then later reading about them, these many of these gurus that were caught in scandals
Hmm.
because they get caught in their occult personality. They think they're so special. I know there was one very popular guru in New York State, I can't remember, upper state. And they had a very large ashram and they traveled all over. And eventually the women got together and fired him. They fired their guru. It was in the New York Times. I read that. And just because of his philandering,
Hmm.
etc. He's very handsome. And sometimes he was Indian. He had a certain degree of knowledge, but he got caught by this, I call it the occult or spiritual personality, and thought himself invincible, right? In the esoteric sense, what happens is that the, call it his soul energy is diverted from going into his pure aspect of his being, which I term in my book the essential nature, but instead feeds a certain negative aspect of the emotions that become the energy instead of going outwards in compassion goes inwards in self-aggrandizement.
Why do you think that's such a problem, particularly in occult and esoteric groups and people?
Because it's very difficult work, and most do not want to really analyze themselves. And once you start, say I'm a teacher. Fortunately, I have very few students. Um,
So it keeps you
that's
humble, is that the idea?
Yeah, no, that's true. If you look historically at many of the great gurus, their real students were very few. There may be followers, but actual students. So if a guru teacher has many students, many, that means the forces of the astral aspiration of those students are impacting on his astral body. And very few, unless they're extremely strong, are aware of that.
Hmm.
And they get caught in the idolization. That's why in the occult, and if you look at even great, great teachers like Padmasambhava, who's very, how would you call, very advanced being, he had maximum maybe 25, but only two that were masters with him. Even historically, you look at Sri Ramana Maharishi, that was in late 40s. I think he died maybe in late 40s or 50s. In South India, many people followed and went to his ashram, but he only had a handful of real disciples,
Mm.
right?
But
The
even the
real,
Christ, he had, a core of like 12 people. But even of those, there were only a few of them he regarded, of a certain height. Like in the Garden of Gethsemane, he only called a few of them to come and, as he put it, keep the watch with them.
possibly, I don't know. That's a story. So, but there is certain but yes, so there is limitations. So the real teacher does not have a lot of students. My teacher, who was an initiate, only had 7 or 8 students, and that includes his wife, nephew, daughter, right, and myself and a couple of others. So
Mm.
it, the esoteric teaching, the real deeper esoteric teaching, cannot be spread far. There's so many people say, oh, they want to spread this esoteric teaching out to the world. It's very limited that what you can do.
But over time, people evolve and a little bit more of it can be given out and a little bit more, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
As this, they talk about the different waves. First through Theosophy, Helena Blavatsky. She gave out a certain group of ideas that helped impact the mental body of humanity. She didn't give out methods of meditation, psychology. She gave out knowledge to help break through a lot of the, how would you call it, superstitions and religious fairy tales
Well, and
to shut,
separation too, because
pardon?
it's very much
Separation.
this is this religion and that's that religion. And part of what she did was, looking at the underlying things that actually connected them.
Right. So she started the process of synthesis.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then came a little later Alice A. Bailey, and through the Master DK, who also taught Blavatsky, started to give out the ideas of meditation, but very, very basic. Okay, because in the 1930s, 1940s, at that time, especially in Europe, North America, other than that, things were very difficult due to 2 world wars. But the standard concepts were based on the Judeo-Christian traditions, and these ideas were brought in just for certain somewhat advanced souls to initiate this next step. And it wasn't until around the 1960s where you see the idea of meditation in the late 60s getting a big boost, so to speak, when the Beatles went and meditated in India. And then he had the movie Woodstock, and it shows people meditating, doing yoga, and what have. Then it reached more into the media and became more, how'd you call it? Mainstream is the word. And
Yeah.
then you have yoga studios slowly happening into the 70s, and more people interested in meditation. And even the ideas about mantra and karma become more mainstream. I even saw a truck one day go drive by and karma construction,
Mm.
right? And in business, people say, I have my mantra. So it's a misuse of a sacred concept, but that just shows that from the time of Blavatsky, who would have talked about things like this, but not given out any ideas, then through Alice Bailey and the Tibetan master, how these ideas over the last 140 years have filtered down to today. And that will increase in the next 140, 200
Yeah.
years.
It's an interesting side note. You know Frank L. Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz?
Not personally.
Well, not But he was a theosophist, I understand it.
Okay.
And you see some of those ideas sort of encoded into The Wizard of Oz, and that took off a lot sooner to closer to Blavatsky's time.
There was a
This
lot of
idea
that.
of what's that?
There was a lot of that at that
Yeah.
time.
You know,
Even
creating your own reality, right? Like all Dorothy had to do at the end was the power was really within her, not within the external object of the shoes.
a lot of people don't know Colonel Doubleday. Have you ever heard of Colonel Doubleday?
Sounds vaguely familiar. Who was he?
He invented baseball. He was a
Oh,
theosophist.
interesting.
Think about the bases, the innings, everything, how it was set up. So there were a lot of prominent inventors and individuals in that time that were theosophies all through the 1880s to 1920s that actually have an impact on the culture in the US and call it world culture, at least in the Western world.
Yeah.
I can't remember it all, but I always thought it was kind of interesting about baseball.
Yeah, a lot of these people kept that kind of a secret because it wasn't um, necessarily a good thing publicly. I know there's some people that are interested in the Alice Bailey writings and they're semi-public figures, but they don't want that out there. So
No, they're difficult and they're also difficult to read and understand. So many people read them because they've been around for quite a long time.
yeah.
So even
But
Elvis Presley read.
yeah, Tupac Shakur, he was apparently a fan of Alice Bailey. He had at least one of her books,
Who?
Pondering This. Tupac Shakur, he was a famous rapper.
Oh, don't
Anyway,
know.
but so if somebody's hearing about this, there's these initiations. How do they know if uh, it's even worth them pondering on? How do they know if they're getting to the point where they need to prepare for this or start to undertake it?
Well, there is no preparing, and if you don't know, then you don't. If you feel the strong urge inside, that means your soul is stirring and it's trying to guide you, then you have a choice to follow that urge or not. It's
Hmm.
simple.
So can you walk us through these kind of five initiations that are usually talked about in Theosophical and Alice Bailey writings?
Sure. Um, the first initiation, many have undergone that. If you find that you are interested in any type of spirituality, but especially the spirituality from the East, and you find yourself studying yoga, maybe Kabbalah, maybe some theosophy, or various other occult, and you find this urge is very strong, then you may have attained what's called the first state, what's called parivajaka. That's called the wanderer. You wander through the smorgasbord, if you might, of various spiritual teachings, changing. Oh, I like this. This feels so right. This talks to my soul. And you do that for so long, and then something else comes, and then, oh, this is more interesting. And that could go on actually for several lives. If it comes to the point that no matter what happens, how difficult life becomes, how the struggles that you have just in life, but you don't stop in your spiritual search, there's a good chance you've passed through the first initiation. But if struggles come and you say, well, I'm not going to bother with this stuff anymore, it's not worth it, and you leave
The
it,
football game's on. I can't put that off. Yeah.
etc., something. But I mean, you leave it for the rest of your life, then you probably have not yet passed through the first initiation. The first initiation, you don't know yourself. You're searching for answers. You feel unfulfilled. You're trying to find, search, look. It may even manifest through trying to find different kinds of jobs. You're not happy with this, not happy with that. And you study, you read philosophy, yoga, what
Oh,
have you. but there's this unfulfilled feeling deep inside you. So that's the first. And as I said, that can go along. If you look at mythology of the story of Hercules searching for the golden apples of the Hesperides, that's passing the first initiation, but not yet entering the door. And in the story, at least the one translated by the Master DK, he gets caught for a period by, they call it Busiris, who is the deceiver of souls. What my teacher would call a Q guru or quack guru, as there are so many around, and you get stuck with that. Could be for one life, it could be several lives as you are wandering, and maybe more than one. But
What
you've
what does that
passed,
what does that
pardon,
mean? You said he's passed the initiation, but he hasn't entered the door. What do you mean?
hasn't entered the esoteric door yet. He hasn't got the golden apples. The golden apples is the initiation into the esoteric. Actually, that's more the first initiation, but yeah, until you've passed through and overcome the Hydra and have the sense of service that awakens to serve, or what they call the Bodhisattva vow, to help your fellow humans in life, until that awakens in your heart, you have not entered the door. There are so many, I meet so many individuals on the esoteric path thinking they have a lot of knowledge, but they haven't even entered the door, thinking they've entered the door. And many are Blavatsky, what is it? They read Alice Bailey, so many. They are called in Buddhism, oh my goodness, I just it means listeners. I just lost the Sanskrit for a second.
Hmm.
Um, so they enjoy the spiritual teaching. They like to hear it. They go to lectures, watch hundreds of things online, meditate here and there, possibly can't meditate. They are in the parivajaka state and have not entered the door yet. The entering the door is not for that many. That's why Blavatsky, if you open the book, The Voice of the Style, Voice of the Silence, pardon me, it says dedicated to the few. Only the few enter the door. Thus, again, what we were talking before, the teacher with disciples or students that enter the door are few.
So this door, is that akin to opening the heart to be more compassionate, or is there more to it than that?
There's a lot more to it than that. Yes, compassion, humility, but it's also related to your occult karma. If you read, it's probably one of the better book, or to me, gives the best instructions from the Master DK, Letters on Occult Meditation. It's karmic links with some individual who has entered the door. One requires that, plus ashramic need. That's sort of like the equation. Plus, if you have the required, uh, how would you say, psychological leaning. I don't know, that's not the right word. It's in the fourth way, Gurdjieff said, called it a magnetic center. In Buddhism, they call it merit. You have built up a certain merit, or this magnetic center, or your essence has started to awake to a certain extent. Then you can pass. Um, just because passing in the door is not, doesn't mean you're pure, means you're just entering into a period of real difficulty and real challenges from a personal occult sense. And even the Tibetan master outlines all the initiations. He only hints at certain things. Thus, if you like the story of Jesus, you have the passion, and the initiations are outlined there, and all of it is through suffering. There's no, ooh, this is happy, this is good, So therefore, only certain souls that have passed through in the past. Once you pass the door, you become Kutijaka. First, you're Parivijaka for many, many cycles, but then you enter the most difficult, which is called Kutijaka. That's between the first and second initiation. And through that is a great deal of struggle to find out more about who am I? What is the kernel of my being? What's its worth and what does it want? Am I willing to be a server of humanity? What am I willing to sacrifice? What am I willing to renounce? So at that stage, you live in the world, but you're not of the world. You start to separate from all the, how do you call it, the effects of media. Uh, you're not nationalistic, political. You start to change inwardly, but that's a struggle. You question everything, everything. And then when you pass the second initiation and really become Kutijaka, Kutijaka means the hut builder. That means you find your place within the hierarchy, for sure. Just like when you have a hut, oh, that's my hut. You enter it, you know that you're home. You know the school that you've entered. You understand your place. And you've passed the second initiation. A variety of things happen. And there's, of course, when you initially pass, and there's advanced aspects. Past the second initiation, there are numerous minor initiations, but you know your place, and there's no doubt to it. Though you still struggle, there's still a huge amount of struggle. And through that struggling, there becomes a transformation of your personality. You look back and you see who you were years before, and you see how your personality, your ideas, insights. And usually, when you pass the second initiation after some time, you know it because your internal contacts become alive. You may have had an experience of a master or something, but now you have more a communication, a realization. So to enter the third initiation, you have to be aware of two masters who sponsor you. And you have to recognize that. Okay, and there's a certain reason. Blavatsky mentions that only in passing in one of the her collective writings, and gives some indication of it. But there's very, very little information on that. But there are two masters. You start to enter into the periphery, call it, of the hierarchy. And the periphery of the hierarchy means that you're being tested. You can't be brought in totally at that point because the hierarchy within each ashram is like a fortress. There's what they call the law of the fortress. And because the initiate to be is still in the state of struggle and trying to overcome the forces of their past karma, many negative forces can be there that can impact on the ashram. And they prevent that by creating sort of a space on the periphery of the ashram. Until you pass close to the third initiation, then you've purified your being, overcome a great deal of this negative karma in an occult sense, and then you can pass into the third initiation. In the third initiation, you eliminate most of your, call it, worldly desires, but you still have them from an occult point of view. As it says in the Voice of the Silence, even great ones can fall. Even as you attain the third initiation, there is the possibility that you can turn to the dark side, so to speak, using a Star Wars uh, phraseology. Third initiation, you begin to develop some abilities. Some have different, what they call siddhis. My teacher developed the power of, on a higher level, of mantra shakti. When you entered into his presence, you could, if you're sensitive, and he generally only wanted his students, you could feel changes in your own mind created by the force field around him. And if you're having certain occult difficulties, he could change and remove certain substances within your astral body, helping you to make progress. Those are powers. Some people have different powers. I know one lady, um, give a slight example. Uh, there's this very young girl, she's 11 or 12, just turning 12 actually in a couple of months, but she got very sick, was taken to the emergency, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Couldn't sleep, something was bothering her at night. Mother is one of my students. So she let us know, and I know the past life of this little girl and know that she's an advanced soul when she becomes 16 or 21 or whatever and awakens. She has a certain place. She's already a member, let's call it, of an ashram, but she's just a little girl. She goes swimming, plays with dollies, whatever. But one individual I know could go on the inner plane, find the problem, heal her instantly, and mother called back, she's better. And we let her know that, well, is a possibility it could come back. Well, it's been a couple of years yet, or whenever it happened, a year ago, and the little girl's still very well. But that's an occult operation on the inner plane. So there are different abilities that some individuals develop, but there are certain rules. Some of these abilities can only be used within the brotherhood, not to people outside. So the fourth initiation, they say between the third and fourth initiation can happen in the same life. But it is the fourth initiation which you give up your human I. All those desires, enjoyments, likes, and dislikes, everything has to be given up. You even given up your soul, and your consciousness is transferred from the Vijnana Maya kosha to the Ananda Maya kosha. Then you become an Arhat. You're enlightened. The Zen call it the golden dewdrop sinks into the shining sea. You become one with the totality. You are more than human. If you find some guru or teacher says, well, I passed the fourth initiation, I'm an Arhat, or in yoga, they call it Paramahansa. There are very few Paramahansa. Yogananda was Paramahansa. But I ran into another guy, Swami Rama, called Paramahansa. He was not Paramahansa. But if they end up writing, giving lectures, running around a lot, generally not. Paramahansa is usually, even though some, like a Yogananda and Ramakrishna, are within society, though Ramakrishna stayed within a temple and very limited movement. But he never wrote. Yogananda wrote earlier on, but more his students wrote for him. Because you're not part of humanity. And then from the fourth initiation to the fifth initiation, then your consciousness is transferred to the monadic plane. Though you maintain your Buddhic vehicle, you become one with, they call it the divine, the totality of the divine. It's the golden dew, the sea is now within the golden dewdrop. you become at one. It's not easy to talk about the fifth initiation, and there are not many descriptions. And to what is it, to make conjectures or assumptions, but you become a master of wisdom. In the story of Hercules, when he has to clean out the Aegean stables and diverts the river to wash through these age-old stables to clean out all the dirt and grime. That means as a master, you can divert karmic forces to change the thought forms of humanity. You can cause changes on the inner plane that'll eventually work their way to the outer plane. You have much greater powers. Also, you work to try and reduce certain kinds of cosmic forces from impacting on humanity and become part of what they call the guardian wall. But only certain group of masters stay on Earth. Some work on the inner planes, as was talked about in the book Yogananda's Autobiography of Yogi, when his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who was a master of wisdom, returned and told him that he was now in a place called Satya Loka, helping advanced souls. So it's very fascinating.
Yeah, it really gets into it. And like you say, some of it we can't just know. I mean, the Tibetan and others write about it, but until you're there, you're not there, right?
Exactly. And why guess, right? So that's why some books are very valuable, but there are few.
Is there anything else that's often overlooked about initiation or any other ideas about it you want to touch on?
We are told, and if you study and see yourself, initiation is a process. It takes a long time. If you read my book, I discuss an initiation of my teacher that took 10 years.
Hmm.
I call it under the chapter, The Ordeal. He underwent a great ordeal, and I helped him for about 5 years in this ordeal, which I underwent. You can call it a minor initiation. I had a regular job, a salesperson, um, then became a sales manager. At that time, I think I was still, it might have been, I think, just sales, business to business industrial sales. And, I'd start my day seeing customers at 8:30 and work till 4:30, 5, what have you, driving around the area around here, my territory, as it's called. But I'd finish, come home, have dinner, and I'd have to go to sleep. And maybe at 7 o'clock and wake up at 11:30, then drive over to an individual's house that my teacher was helping go
11:30 at
on.
night?
Yeah,
Okay.
go at 11:30 p.m., midnight area. And I would stay to 4 a.m. helping. I did that for 4.5 years, every day, no holiday.
Wow.
Then I'd get up, I'd drive home 4:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock, try and jump in bed for 2 hours, meditate, get up and go to work.
What were you doing to help at the that house?
That I can't explain. That's very esoteric. And uh, let's just say this particular individual, I guess, had a certain karma with my teacher, and my teacher had to save his soul.
Hmm.
But his soul had been transferred into my teacher's mind or chitta. So everything that individual did was impacted on my teacher instantly. And at night, they were at one. So at night, certain forces would act through this individual that would impact on my teacher. So my job was to make sure at night he had to quit his job. He was before, I guess it's okay to say, I think I said it in the book. Haven't read my book for a while. A high-priced lawyer.
Mhm.
He had to give up his job. I lent him money so he could pay for keep his car and a bunch of other things. So I was still working, and other people helped. But I helped on a physical level. Other people were helping in another respect. So I had to keep him up all night because if he fell asleep, the impacts that it created esoterically, which again I can't discuss, that goes into much deeper ideas of the esoteric, which aren't in any books. Only slight hints. I found a hint in the Raisin Initiation, Volume 5, and then I could never find it again. There was
Mhm.
one small paragraph, and I said, "Oh, that's it." Huh. Anyways, so that was my job,
So
and
were
that
you other than the financial assistance, you were going there to some like how balance the energy or just keep him awake?
keep him awake.
Mhm.
I had to stay awake all night.
Did he like sleep during the day or?
Yeah, he could sleep a bit during the day, but he would go into trances. I remember walking down the street and he went into a trance walking and walked into a telephone pole. As I was walking beside him, I didn't say anything. Well, bang. Um, and when these, again, there are forces from past lives that impact us constantly, but we're not conscious of it. The past is the engine that runs the present, but when you uh, enter the deeper esoteric, then you start to understand the meaning of Pandora's box. When Pandora's box is opened, if you remember the mythology, what came out and
Mhm.
what was left? All that was left is hope and faith, which is something that's extremely important, even in the esoteric. But you can read my book. There's a lot of interesting occult knowledge there that you cannot find anywhere. Guarantee it. Based on my experiences.
I don't know if you touch on it in the book, but I guess people will be interested. How does such a state happen that somebody's mind is so thoroughly linked to somebody else's soul?
It was done by one of the masters
Mhm.
who did it in order to put my teacher and this being. So in the end, this other person, their soul was saved, so to speak, which means uncovered, so they could have a link with their soul. People think to link with the soul is easy and say, "Oh, my soul, this, my." It's just illusion and nonsense. The esoteric's based on fifth ray, exact scientific knowledge, not on guesswork. Uh, and then my teacher had gained powers. It's
Through
very
this
fascinating.
initiation, through this sacrifice he made to
Yeah,
greater light and
exactly.
truth.
It changed his whole being. Changed a good deal in mine too, because of what I went through. But other people went through different things too, relative to that.
Mhm.
But it was guided by one of the masters.
Well, I guess what you described there, it almost sounds like the process of group initiation.
Yes, part in a certain respect, I would agree. There was a certain group initiating. There were failures and those that passed.
That's one of the concepts that I think that's the least understood, and I'm not pretending to understand it myself, but is there anything you could add to the process of group initiation and how that works and what that looks like?
Yeah, we have a minute or two. Group initiation is an experiment. It is extremely difficult until the members of the group learn to separate from their personality and create and have a stable center of awareness where they know their soul versus the likes and dislikes, the comforts and discomforts of the personality. It's not easy to hold a group together. Even my group, there's a lot of challenges. So my group is on different levels, from the more advanced, secondary advanced, and then those out in the periphery. The ones that are more advanced have to be aligned and overcome the difficulties of personality. Very difficult, because the personality, you feel uncomfortable, somebody says something, does something, the hair in the back of your neck goes up, and whatever. That has to be overcome. The Tibetan master talks that there has to be love and compassion, tolerance between everyone, but you become impersonal, but not cold. Not sentimental is different. Most of our attachments relate to sentimentality, or the Buddha called it clinging, and we have a tendency to cling to things. So you have to be able to separate. When you become more understanding, you have what they call, uh, hmm, just thinking of a particular term, and maybe it's not time to mention it because I can't think of it at the moment. Certain things happen. Oh, you can split your awareness, and you know how to be inward and outward at the same time. You know how to observe, see what's happening inwardly and outwardly at the same time. And in the group, at an advanced level, you have to be able to accomplish that. Otherwise, personality is always self-centered. And because of that self-centeredness is destructive and separating. Essence, which is related to buddhi, is related to deep feelings, is always uniting and based on a deeper, what we call love and truth, but not love in a personal sense. It's an impersonal love that is brings together, that bonds. That's the idea of marriage. So that's the occult marriage in a certain sense. So group becomes your new family. And it's very difficult, extremely difficult.
All right. Well, some interesting insights there. For the final question, which I asked to the Ageless Wisdom people now, what aspect of the plan do you think people should be aware of or is worth putting more light on, as DK sort of defines it?
This I find very difficult because the plan, as it is called, from religions talk about it, theosophy, not so much, except through DK, unless you're one of those great masters who supposedly we're told get together every 100 years to discuss this aspect. And if you're not there with them, it's very hard to know what they're thinking. So anything regarding this aspect of the plan, I look at it this way. One has to put one's being into harmony. If you make those efforts to be in harmony versus disharmony, and to understand what harmony is. I discuss that in my new book, Esoteric Writings. I even do a diagram to give an idea of this. But if you can center your being and become more in harmony in your life, then you are helping whatever this plan is. If you are compassionate, humble, and helping in some little way, don't look to do big things. Don't think, oh, I'm helping the world. I'm in a group and we meditate and we're going to change the world. That's glamour. It's nonsense. It's like there were a group of aspirants before the Second World War. Some were very famous, like Aldous Huxley and Christopher Isherwood. They were disciples of a certain level. And they were all meditating endlessly, sending love over to Hitler. A lot of good that did. Probably made them worse. So there are groups today that are doing similar things. It's a glamour. Just learn to find your inner harmony, be compassionate and humble, and work on yourself. Learn to meditate, study. Know, who am I? Man, know thyself. That is the greatest knowledge.
Good thoughts. And I think that's like what we we're talking about earlier, why a lot of metaphysical groups and esoterics go astray. They leave, I don't have to be decent in my personal life. I'm working on the stuff that's so important, and I don't have to worry about the supposedly little things.
Exactly.
All right, well, it's been a great interview. I've enjoyed hearing your insights, and I'm sure we'll probably have you on again someday. Uh,
Sounds good.
yeah.
And
So
I
thanks for
enjoyed it.
coming on, and everybody check out Cyrus's book. You can find the link in the description. And do you want to plug your meetings? Do you want to let people know you have those?
So for more information, you can go to www.northernschoolofelsotericwisdom.com. There's also a Northern School of Esoteric Wisdom Facebook page. On Tuesday night, it's uh, twice a month, I have esoteric talks. Um, you can go to message me either through the Facebook, Northern School of Esoteric Wisdom, or the website. Um, there's a lot on the website, um, and you can take part if you feel the urge to do that. I
All right.
never
Well,
charge for anything. Sorry.
yeah.
Just so you know, I never charge. Everything is based on if you wish to give a donation, that's fine. But there are no charges for any aspects that we do.
All right. And we'll have links to some of that stuff in the bottom also.
That's
So
great. Thank
if
you.
you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it and consider sharing it with somebody who might also find it useful. And if you'd like to see more interviews and videos, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Thanks for coming on, Cyrus. And that's it for this time on Joshua's Magic.
My pleasure. Thank you, Josh.